Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
Hi, and welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. I'm your host, Tom Bourne, and with me today is the amazing Clive Lloyd and the equally awesome Brad Green. Gentlemen, how are we?
Really well, Tom. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, fairly well.
I am doing fantastic today.
Good. Clive, it's been a while. It's been almost 9 months, 10 months. What have you been up to in the last, 9-10 months?
More of the same, really, and that is touring around the countryside, rolling out the Care Factor program here and overseas, and then sometimes in this very room virtually, and recruiting for staff because it's getting really, really busy and we need more people. So yeah, it's just been full on.
And what sort of people are you after? Anything in particular?
Really good ones, Tom.
Well, that rules me out.
No, far from you're the goat. Apparently, you're the goat. I've seen that on the LinkedIn profile. It's interesting though. Like some of the people we've been recruiting for are logistics people, just to help keep our people on the road. But it's really challenging for us because our people, first up, they have to have a background in psychology, ideally psychologists. They need to know safety really, really well and leadership. They need to be fantastic facilitators and they need to be prepared to travel their butts off. So you put all those together and it really sort of narrows the field. But yeah, we're getting some really good applicants, which is great.
Excellent. And young Brad, it seems like yesterday we spoke, but it wasn't. It was about a month or 2 months ago. How have you been?
I have been doing fantastic. Same thing, just going out, visiting our sites, trying to figure out how work is actually done, spending time learning my new role within my organization and getting a feel for what is to be and meeting all the good people that gets the work done each and every day, which is what I enjoy most doing.
Excellent. We're going to have a free-flowing conversation, but I just want to get the one bit I did structure out of the way. Before we went on air, I asked just to write down on a piece of paper your definition of safety.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I wanted you to write it down is so that whoever speaks first does not influence the next person. Okay. I'll go first. I'll show you my lovely piece of paper is here, and I'll read it to you. It's very simple. Safety to me is the feeling of being protected from danger or risk. Okay. Who wants to go next?
I'm happy to go. And I got what a thing to do, Tom. All right. Before we even start recording, before the coffee has really gone in, because it's still fairly early here, you hit us with that. Anyway, I'm a simple man. I've written something down here. I'll read it to you. And my simple response is working well and reliably and doing that consistently with the full collaboration of the workforce.
Fantastic. You're up, Brad.
Yeah. What Clive said.
And you've got that written down, right, Brad? You got that written down, right?
I exactly written it down.
Yeah.
No, I believe that the practice of safety requires embracing the concept of acceptable risk as a goal.
Good.
I believe that safety professionals assist in managing risk to an acceptable level within the context of the business. Cool. So it's ever flowing, regardless of where you go. And for me, that's a very complex question. We talked about this before, but as you know, there's no mutual agreement on what safety is globally, locally, and organizationally, which creates a lot of conflict within an organization if there's multiple definitions of what safety is.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you wrote it down because there was going to be no influence, but I have to let you know that, and you know that I'm a big follower of Mr. Clive, so he's already had a lot of influence on me before I even wrote it down. So So yeah.
Good. The reason
It is a great. Go ahead. Sorry, Tom.
the reason I actually brought that up was because to me it seems fairly fundamental that if we're going to talk about safety, we're going to talk about being safe, we're going to be safety professionals, we're going to be working in the safety field, that we all have maybe a similar idea of what actually safety is. That seems to be the cornerstone.
Yeah.
And if safety means different things to different people because of their perspectives, background, experiences, etc., how on earth are we ever going to be able to measure what actual safety is?
Yeah. It's a great point, mate. And clearly, not everybody does agree on what safety actually is. Hence, you get many different approaches. For some people, being safe means you have a 97-page JSA, or it's about people absolutely complying and following procedures to the letter all of the time. And other people, it's about collaborative relationships and so forth. So I think it's really important to understand, well, how do we view safety? Because that will steer what we do. Whether we go with the compliance mindset and just producing lots and lots and lots of stuff for safety, having lots of safety people, lots of procedures, versus having, just really working out relationships with people so that we can hear from the workforce and how to do. So I think it's a brilliant question. How do we frame safety? Because how we frame it largely is going to guide, influence what we end up doing about safety.
Yeah, of course. And if you define it as the absence of harm, then or perfection, then you're going to approach things a little bit differently if you define it in another manner. You're going to strive for that. And of course, perfectionist goals do not set people up for success. Rather, they set them up for failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that people's perceptions of safety are different in different parts of the world, like developing and developed countries?
Yeah, I do, and I've got some pretty good evidence for that. In that I have worked in many places around the world. Whether you call it developed versus underdeveloped or mature versus, again, different angles, right? And there are many reasons why different countries take different approaches. Some of them are down to finances, some of the resources available, the culture of a given country. When I first went to China to work, my first day there was going to a pre-start meeting, and it's still extraordinary for me to think back. But the pre-start meeting was 200 people standing to attention for 20 minutes, while their managers actually spoke at them essentially for 20 minutes. At the end of the 20 minutes, they saluted, and it was off to work. So there's no discussion of anything. There's no questions asked. And I think the assumption was, safety for us is, we will tell you right now what you're going to do. You will do it. That's our expectation. And then, that's it. Now, that wouldn't wash in Australia, right?
Mm.
Nobody's going to go to a pre-start and stand to attention or salute at the end of it. It's a very different thing. Again, the power distance ratio has been well documented in the safety field. And again, the power distance ratio actually changes from nation to nation. A lot of work in the Philippines, where the last thing anybody would ever do is question management.
Mm.
It's just not done, and so forth. So yeah, absolutely, different perspectives on safety. And look, frankly, life in general influences all of this stuff from nation to nation. Yeah. I'm not saying anything's right by that. In our Western nations, in Australia, I don't think we've got safety right at all. I think we've got a view that tends to drive certain things that are possibly not helpful. But yeah, to answer your original question, it differs greatly in different parts of the world.
I think it different parts of the world, but what I have noticed is even within an organization, big organization, especially one that has a retributive approach. But, when we talk about globally, of course, there's going to be various views of what safety is and how we obtain what we're trying to get at, right? But I find it troubling where we look at safety differently within an organization. And that is what I'm mostly focused on is looking at how do we get people to understand, how do we get to the location in which we're trying to get to, and really try to emphasize the humanization of people, of the safety profession. Until we can humanize the safety profession, I do not believe that we will progress much past where we are today. We must shift how organizations view our workers. And
It's
just
sorry, Ben.
just like you had mentioned, that people does not feel safe to speak up because they feel that they're going to be made fun of, humiliated, chastised, fired, and that is an organization that is an organization, of course, that I don't want to be a part of, and something that I'm totally against.
Yeah, and I know that of you through your approach, Brad. It's just interesting there, though. You mentioned, aligning safety within an organisation, let alone culture. Have I got time, Tom, to give you a bit of an example around
go
this?
for it. Please do.
So, a global company I'm working with, they've got operations in many countries, and we're looking at running the Care Factor program through these. And it was really interesting because in their one area in Europe, very, very heavily into behaviour-based safety, fairly traditional behaviour-based safety. I think part of it is what we call the sunk cost effect. Yeah, they've spent millions rolling out behaviour-based safety programs. Hasn't really done any good, but it's like, well, we spent all this money on it. We need to keep the behaviour-based approach. This is not uncommon, right? So they keep shoveling money into it. However, in their United States operation, they've moved towards what we might call if you like, a new view approach, a safety differently approach. And so I'm speaking to the heads. I'm doing a webinar speaking to the heads of these same organization, right? But they've got very, very different views on how they want to progress it. And so for me, the conversation turned to go, let's not get hung up here on the model, whether it's behavior-based safety or safety differently. And if you permit me just to expand on this, there's really good reason not to do that. It's quite dangerous sometimes to actually get attached to the model as the right model. And if I can go back to my clinical psychology days, this is the best way I can describe it. Psychologists, just like safety people, we've got all these models available to us, right, that we can use with clients and so forth. Back to the old Freudian psychoanalytic approaches, behaviorism, still there. Cognitive therapy, ACT, all these different models. Now, a long time ago now, when I was studying, brilliant lecture, one of the best lectures I've been to, the professor actually said, right, these are all the models, right? And he said, your homework, the homework assignment is to study them, which we do. And it's really interesting. And so when you come back, though, to the next lecture, we're going to just break off into small groups. And I want you to discuss which is your favorite model and why that is the case. So we've all done the groundwork. We're back in the room, small groups, 4 or 5 students. No kidding here, within 5-10 minutes, it was getting really heated, right? Why, this is the best, this is the model you should use, this is the model I use. And within 15 minutes, it was like LinkedIn on a bad day. It was like, just waiting for the biff. And anyway, the lecturer quite strategically, I think, he let us go. He let us go for it. Then he pulled us up and he said, right, let's have a look. Let's have a look at what actually the research tells us. What does the evidence actually tell us? And he said, the model that we use in terms of what predicts success comes way down the list to the point of insignificance. What is right at the top of the list in terms of what predicts success is what we call the therapeutic alliance. Now, all we mean here by the therapeutic alliance is, of course, the relationship, the trust between these people doing the work. What he's saying is it doesn't matter what model you use if you have not first created that relationship, that mutual trust. If you have done that, then you can become, the word we use is eclectic. Most psychologists are eclectic practitioners. We draw from all manner of different models, depending on the client needs, where they're up to. Now, when you've created that relationship, you can do that. And that whatever you do is likely to gain traction. Here's my point. If we have not created that alliance, it doesn't matter what you use. If it's HOP, doesn't matter. If it's safety differently, or even, God forbid, behaviorism, it doesn't matter. And so my point would be, for me at least, it doesn't bode well for us or our clients or our people if we're just sticking with one model because we believe it's the right one. If you have not first created that alliance, and that's the hard work, by the way, it's easy to do HOP, I reckon. HOP's got 5 principles. They're easy to talk about. Please don't make the mistake of thinking that is easy to do. If you have not created the trusting alliance, HOP's not going to make any sense to people. At least the people on the receiving end. So what am I saying? First and foremost, create the relationship, create the alliance, and then be eclectic. Use what's going to be useful for the people. Sorry to go on a bit there, Tom, but I think it's an important point.
No, it's great. Great. Any thoughts, Brett?
No, I believe he nailed it on the head. And again, if you don't build that trusting relationship, no matter what we do, everything's going to be felt, as if we're telling people what to do. You've got to really build that trusting relationship in order to, and also just like our workers do each and every day, we have to adapt to the conditions and the circumstances and the location and the people that we're around to be able to be successful. And I would say our workers are probably more successful than we are, but but that's that adaptation. And again, just to echo what he said, is I don't believe there's one singular approach. They're all a little bit too linear. You've got to be able to use a transdisciplinary approach and understand and really try to humanize the workforce. And when you humanize the workforce and when you allow people to help with the decisions, it creates this foundation of trust. They feel as if you trust them, and then you have this mutual buy-in, this mutual responsibility. And I think, that's what the Care Factor program is so, I think, powerful, is because it gives you 3 attributes that are so easily understood. The integrity, the ability, and benevolence. Of course, give it to Clive to use the big word. But if you have those three factors, you can develop trust. And as Clive quoted in his book, or to paraphrase Meatloaf, 2 of the 3 ain't bad. However, when it comes to creating trust, it is not enough. So you can have the ability, you can have benevolence, but if you don't have integrity, you're not going to have trust. So, the attributes that we have, that we all can and learn, is foundational in order to create any successful program, regardless of what you use.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Just want to take it back a little bit, but difference about perspectives and safety. May have given this a bit of thought in all my spare time. Is people's perceptions on safety just a construct that they've made in their own mind?
I think so. Don't get me wrong; they haven't necessarily created it from scratch. I'm sure they've been influenced, but safety is a construct, right? And that's why we define it in very different ways. My construct of safety has been influenced by my own experiences, by people and of course we're very biased with that. I tend to be influenced by people who agree with me, right?
And vice versa.
I tend to be less influenced by people But again, it's a construct that has developed over time.
Mm.
And again, that's why we're in danger of just viewing safety as one narrow construct. We will tend to keep going back to, what we believe, based on our experiences, based on our influences. But I mentioned before too, Tom, and don't get too fixated on a model, sure, but it would be denial to suggest that we don't have our favorite models.
Mm.
I do.
Mm.
Most people do. And that's absolutely fine. I tend to favor the more humanistic approaches in psychology, and equally the more humanistic approaches in safety. So that would lend themselves more to say, yeah, sure, HOP or safety differently. But again, not because I've read Decker or Conklin, only because they tend to actually mirror the research in psychology. Because what are those concepts about? They're about bringing people in, collaborating with the workforce rather than That's the reason I like them. So they lend themselves more to creating what Brad's just been talking about, creating trust. Try creating trust through radical behaviorism, right? It's not going to happen. What I will say, though, is there's some dangers here with HOP and safety differently. I remember speaking with the wonderful Stephen Harvey, who rolled out essentially a safety differently program at Queensland Urban Utilities. It was made a big video by Sydney Decker, this huge big thing. But I remember Stephen saying 6 months into that rollout, they were struggling. And they were struggling because he realized what they didn't do first was to create that alliance with the workforce. Mm-hmm. And so what they're doing is they come straight in with safety differently and HOP type principles. And the workforce are thinking, hang on, you reckon you want us to run the show now after you've been telling us what to do and punishing it for us for the last 20 years? You know what I mean? It's all right to say, we're going to roll out HOP or safety differently. It's just not going to happen. There will be unintended consequences of doing that unless you first overcome that mistrust. So again, the workforce have a construct around safety. And that is formed over time. Leaders have a construct. And where those constructs do this, well, that's where we get challenges, right? In my view.
Yeah.
No, I think that's totally true. You got to overcome the mistrust first. And that takes time. And I think that is one aspect that most organizations struggle with the most. You cannot change a culture overnight. You can't just flip a light switch. You can't just say, I'm going to do this tomorrow. It takes a lot of time, especially, in organizations, in a very complex organizations. Of course, humans are very complex. And that is one struggle that I believe a lot of organizations struggle with, is the fact that they want to see change right now, not develop a plan and then develop a smart objective in order to get there. They want it right now. And unfortunately, that's not how behaviors and people work, because we have all shaped ourselves over the years based on our past experiences. And if we don't first trust what they're doing, there's always going to be this sense of, what are they doing? What is this about? Right? Why are they taking this approach now?
Yeah. You just mentioned something there that sort of over the years, Brad, I've learned the hard way, by the way. And that is, given the nature of what we've been doing for the last 20 years, organizations will often phone us up. And their immediate request is, so how long is it going to take, Clive? What do you mean? Well, to change our culture, say from, depending which variable or which objectives you're looking at, from a level 2 to a level 4, how long? And I kind of these days shrug my shoulders and say, I don't know, 10 years. And again, what I mean by that is organizations don't have one culture. They just don't. No organization has. They've got many cultures. I would argue every single team, to a degree, has its own culture. And I honestly believe, and this sounds terribly pessimistic, forgive me, but to look at trying to change the culture, an organizational culture, is doomed from the start. And that's because, first up, you don't have one. The culture is too big, too unwieldy. How the hell do you define it anyway? And what I've learned is most organizations give it a crack, realize it's way too hard and it's just not going to happen anyway. Then they give up. They just default back to the quick and easy. Let's go back to the stick and carrot approach. And what I've learned, what can happen relatively quickly is one leader can set up the conditions within their team where collaboration, trust, psychological safety can thrive. One leader, often one conversation at a time with one team. That can happen. Now, if you've got lots of your leaders doing that because they want to and they know how to and they're given permission to do so, that's when you can, almost the byproduct of that is the overall organization starts to sort of tweak. But honestly, I believe the best way to look at culture change is forget about culture and just look at one leader setting up the conditions with their own team where psychological safety can thrive, trust. That is doable, and that is actually doable relatively quickly, but it's not easy. And that's where I do fall out a bit with this quick fix, hop or safety differently. Quick, just roll that, that'll fix everything. No, it won't. Same as behaviorism didn't fix everything. None of that's actually going to work unless you put the work in first. Now, why don't more people do it? Because it's bloody hard. We have to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
No, that's right. Success is a journey, not a designation. And we want to go to the designation first. Unfortunately, you can't go from point A to point Z without going through all the other letters of the alphabet. We can't, it's a journey, and we must, do it that way, very methodically. And again, putting a timeline on something is delusional at the least.
I still get asked that question a lot. How long?
No, I hear that too, and I don't know, right? It's too complex, and I would echo your words about there's no really reason to talk about culture because, as you mentioned, there's so many cultures within an organization that it would be almost impossible to even define what it is. What I find intriguing is when I was looking for my last position, I had the luxury to have 8 months off, which is when I found Mr. Clive, and when I was doing interviews with a lot of organizations, I would always ask to talk to an employee, and I always ask them, well, what are your company's objectives? What are your company's values? And 99% of of those questions, no one could tell me one of the values. Not one.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really common.
Yeah, and that is where it's supposed to start, right? Is setting up the values.
Yeah.
And I've only seen one company do it really good. I've only seen one company, really preach and really talk about their values each and every day, and they lived and breathed their values.
Yeah, mate, you've the whole values thing. And again, I'm sounding pessimistic this morning. Maybe I haven't had enough coffee, Tom, but
not enough coffee.
It's almost to the point where I wish most organizations, Brad, based on what you were just saying there, wouldn't have values. And I only say that because almost invariably, the values they've got, and it's easy to find out, right? You just look on their website, usually top right or bottom left, or the posters on the wall. These are the values. Now, of course, in org psych, we talk about those two different sort of approaches to values, the espoused values and the in-use values. So in other words, the espoused values are the ones on the website. They're the ones on the posters. They're the ones we say we operate from. Then there's the in-use values that you've just been talking about, Brad. What do we actually see from leaders and so forth on a day-to-day basis? Almost invariably, sorry to be pessimistic, those values don't actually match up. And again, if we're talking here about building trust and things like that, nothing says cynicism more than when an organization says our value is integrity, or safety is number one, not uncommon, but then we act in very different ways. Now, those values are doing more harm than good. On those relatively few cases where the organisations actually do live their values, well, there's an opportunity to create trust. And people see, the workforce see that management mean what they say. But those are such rare events that it's almost to the point I think, well, don't have any. Because invariably, sorry, I'm rattling on a bit here. There's a company called us in. They wanted help with that. They were redesigning their values. And they said, Clive, will you come in and help us? Sure, I say. And I listened to them talk in their management meeting for about 20 minutes. I said, okay, so it sounds like one of your key values is shareholder return. And they said, we can't have that as a value. What will people think of us? And I said, but that seems to be your key focus. At least if that's put as a value, people know what they're signing up for, right? It's not a bad thing, but if people know that, no, we can't have that. Let's have integrity instead. There you go.
Yeah. All right.
It definitely does create an illusion that we are under control, but as we all know, illusions are not reality, and does not and different values have different trade-offs, and different trade-offs depending on the circumstances in which you're in, which you had mentioned safety first, which is as we all know, not something that's totally not true. It creates an illusion that safety and health is being managed, but we know staying in business is always priority number one. And because the risk is our workplace is inherently risky. And that's just a fact.
Mm.
Yeah.
And simply saying that safety is number one, or safety is my number one priority, our people, our workforce are not naive. They're not stupid. And if you say safety is my number one priority, but this pump or this building over here is not working, or it hasn't been working for years, and it's creating spills or it's creating injuries, and you're not doing anything about it, it creates a really big conflict, right?
Yeah, you bet.
All right. Speaking of control, is there any place in modern workplaces, and I'm thinking about any type of workplaces, for sort of command and control structures that we used to see in behavior-based safety, where you did what you're told and you get what you get, and don't question us because we know best?
You go first this time, Brad.
I don't know what the question was. I believe the carrot and stick approach has been retired, and I don't believe that that type of approach is sustainable in the long run. Don't get me wrong; it will create short-term improvements.
Yeah,
but it will also create a lot of distrust.
Yeah, interesting question, Tom. And look, I'm trying to be charitable here and think, where that sort of command control might be useful. All right, so I reckon it might be certainly useful in things like jail, and possibly the armed forces, right? The armed forces, it's particularly in conflict situations. Yeah. I think there probably are times, even in organisations where there's a crisis.
Yes.
I believe that's when leaders maybe need to assume a certain degree of, control. Again, not for the reasons that historically they've done that, which is we just want a workforce that does it as they're told. If we're going to adopt that, I believe it would be for a specific reason. That is, we are in a crisis situation. I need to, at least for a while, become quite directive to say, right, what we need to do right now is this, this, and this. If I stay in that position, or if that's my leadership style, as it were, I'm with Brad. I just don't see a place for, if command control leadership is not dead, it's definitely coughing up blood. All right, it's on the way out. I think most people recognise that. There's no long-term gain there.
Good. All right. Something I've had a bit of a think about. Do you think perhaps we can become too reliant on being directed in how to look after our own safety?
You go again, Brad.
That's another difficult question. I believe that we have a mutual responsibility, and I believe that we must ensure that we have practices and activities in place that allows and creates a culture where people are able and feel free to speak up. I believe that simply telling someone that it's okay to speak up is not a very wise and very logical way of giving them that ability. Um, I don't remember, there was a phrase in Clive's book about this, and it comes back to saying, hey, organizations are very good at shifting the responsibility onto the worker. So therefore, if I give you the responsibility of you shall stop work when it becomes unsafe, I've now shifted the responsibility onto the worker. I believe that creates conflict. And not only that, people view things differently, and things change so quickly that what was safe then may not be safe after the fact, right? It's sort of like um, after an incident, we often attribute that to an unsafe behavior. Well, people don't mean or don't choose to make mistakes, right? They made that decision based on what they thought was good at that given time, or otherwise they wouldn't have made it. But in retrospect, looking back, of course it's obvious. I should have said something, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. But again, I think that we all have a mutual responsibility to to understand our accountability and to do what is necessary. Um, but people view things through a different lens, and there are a lot of uh, psychological aspects to do that go along with why people may not stop work or may not say something, especially when you're in front of a large group of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I think for me, I picture, I've been to Southeast Asia a number of times, and I always marvel at their intersections where there's no road rules, very little road rules, there's very little signage or traffic lights, and you have a massive number of mopeds, scooters, some have got 3, 4 people on them and that. And they seem to navigate their way through these intersections without harm. Yet in lovely Australia, where we've got the traffic lights and that, we still have people which collide head on, or, and I just wonder sometimes if we've taken away the thought process even about safety.
Yeah. Look, you're full of interesting questions today, Tom. It is an interesting. I think there's always a tension. There is always a tension because there is a need to provide people with procedures on how to do a job well and safely. If for no other reason, there's a legal reason to do that. And if there's an incident and we're taken to court and we didn't provide that, well, we're in trouble. So if for no other reason, there's a good legal reason to have things like that in place. Can we overdo it? Totally. Example from yesterday morning, I was working with a client and I walked into the bathroom. Written on a piece of gaffer tape with a felt pen was, the person, you're looking at the person responsible for your safety. You've seen them a million times, right? So first up, that was written in pen on a piece of gaff tape. And I thought, at least if you're going to put a sign up, make it a good one. Underneath that is a 10-point plan on how to wash your hands. Right? And I'm thinking, come on, man, I'm not a kid. Another classic example, I was working, this is many years ago now, but I was working for another consultancy. They brought me in as a sub, and they give me this pack, right? This safety pack to take on the road. And that is when you sort of fly, make sure you've got this and make sure you've got this. When you get your hire car, this was the one that killed me. Here's a tire gauge. We want you to check the pressure of each tire, check each indicator light. And frankly, I did none of that. And none of the other facilitators who worked for that company ever did that. And again, it's the whole parent-child thing, right? I'm a grown man. I'm not stupid. I've been doing this sort of work forever. And that's where the tension is. It's how do we meet our legal obligations, but also how do we make sure our workforce know how to do the job well and safely? What can they refer to do that? And not go beyond that line and treat people like kids. And most places actually tend to go over that line a fair bit, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember a classic sign I've seen at one workplace, which was above the microwave, and it said, danger, ionizing radiation in use. I mean, it's just like, are you serious? We're going to put our heads in there and press the buttons or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was drinking a cup of hot tea the other day in my Yeti cup, and I burnt my tongue. And you know why I did it? Why I burnt my tongue? Because the cup didn't say caution hot.
Yeah, you need a new sticker, Brad. You need a sticker
I do. I do. Uh, yeah, but I think we've if you look at a lot of uh workplaces, we create a lot of hollow rhetoric uh to create an illusion that we've got our
Yeah,
crap under control.
yeah.
But the problem is, if you look at a lot of workplaces, those signs are old, dirty, ratted out, and you know good and well no one looks at them. And it creates this illusion, and it's mostly for legal purposes. We put these warning signs on there because if we do it, we can now shift the responsibility onto the worker, onto the
Yeah.
person that was injured. I put my warning
It's really
signs
interesting.
up.
Sorry, Brad, you keep going.
Yeah, I put my warning signs up. They should have known that, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah. It goes way beyond the line. Many cases, a lot of people, as you mentioned, Brad, a lot of companies, again, if I'm being charitable, they do this stuff with a positive intent, right? And yes, other times it's because we need to fulfill legal obligations. I was reading Decker's stuff a little while ago. His estimation, I'm not sure how much research was behind it, but his estimation is that sort of around about 20% of this sort of stuff that we do is actually required by the regulator, about 20%. So what he's suggesting is, about 80% of what we do, we've made up all by ourselves, right? And I suspect that's probably true, or at least in the ballpark. As Greg Smith points out sometimes, though, we've got to be a bit careful with it. We've got to find out what is actually required by legislation, but it's also good to know what isn't and so forth. But oh man, there is so much stuff done because we feel regulators do need it, but they actually don't. Even stuff like LTI rates. Almost every safety manager I've ever met believes that LTI rates, recordables, are required by the regulator. They are not. And yet we're going to keep measuring, and I know we are. Not too many people are ready to give those away. But don't put it on the regulator, those guys. They don't even need it.
Yeah, yeah.
I do wish that the TRIR was coughing up blood like the carrot and the stick approach, though. But unfortunately, I believe you're totally true. They feel as if it's statistically valid and it actually means something, which we know it's totally not. And there's tons
Yeah,
of research out there that will prove likewise. And
yeah,
there's no uh, empirical evidence that your TRR is an indicator of anything, which is
no,
why I don't use the word indicator around injury rates.
yeah,
When I do have rates of some sort or numbers, I call them a dashboard. It's
Mm.
just numbers.
yeah.
Uh, but
But if,
And
there's a
Brad,
lot of good work on that out there.
yeah, Brad, it's a lot of people say, oh, well, look, all right, maybe they're not that valid, but they do no harm. I beg to differ,
Mhm.
and this is why. Often the TRIFR rate um, is used as a comparative measure, right? In other words, this contractor versus this contractor, this one has a higher TRIFR rate. Now, here in Australia, in the construction industries, you've got a big tier one looking at, bringing on some subcontractors. Often one of the criteria they use to actually choose their subcontractors is that TRIFR rate.
Mm-hmm.
And in other words, we will tend to choose the subcontractors with the lower TRIFR rates. Now, again, as you mentioned, Brad, there is no evidence that the variation in that TRIFR rate predicts anything. In fact, I think you've got to have about 3 billion hours of work data available to you to have any difference at all. They're non-predictive as a comparative tool. And yet your tier
Yep.
ones are choosing the ones with the... Now, think about that. If you're a subcontractor and you're actually pitching for a bunch of jobs with tier ones, what are you almost being incentivized to do here?
but
Well,
Well, you're
you
just
don't want to
store.
you don't want a reporting culture.
You don't want a reporting culture. You're going to
Right.
create a distortion, underreporting,
Yeah.
various devil, just the opposite of what safety actually is,
Yeah.
right? And
Uh,
and
it's
and I
not harmless.
no, that is true. And we talk about harm anyway, and we know that you can't measure harm. It is unmeasurable because there's a lot of things that we do in our workplace that cause harm that we cannot measure.
Yeah.
And psychological harm, even simple stress, um, whatever it may be. But there are tons of things in a workplace that causes harm that is unmeasurable.
yeah.
Yeah.
Could I
Absolutely.
could I just say, yeah, I'm with you, Clive. It does cause harm because to me there's a two factor thing involved, and I hadn't even thought about the contractor part. The first thing is it creates an illusion of safety, and that creates complacency because we believe everything's beautiful. And it's really a throwaway figure we give those in upper management to reassure them so that they can sleep well in their beds at night. So I think that's a danger in itself.
Mm.
But the other thing with it is, you know, if we stop measuring useless activity or meaningless activity, what are we going to do with our time? I mean, seriously, we might have to do some real work and talk to people and, make the place actually
Yeah.
genuinely safer instead of recording rubbish statistics that are meaningless,
Yeah.
perhaps.
I was, yeah, I was out at the site the other day. Well, not at my site, but at a previous company. And when I could care less about the number, I see the person. I don't look at a number. I see the person. And I went to one of my regional sites and I went to go see the location in which where the incident happened to talk to the person to make sure that, how they were doing, making sure that they felt all right, but also to kind of, talk to the employees about, how they felt about the event and simply get their input before I started trying to fix the problem. And I'd asked one of the employees and I said, well, what do you think about this? And he goes, I've been thinking about this all weekend, trying to figure out a different way that we could approach this. Think about that. An
Mm.
employee, shop floor employee, was they're trying to solve the problem. And that's what our employees do, is they solve problems. Our biggest assets are our employees. They're already on our payroll. If we can just simply go out and have conversations with our employees, they can shed so much light on the workforce.
Yeah.
And you're right. We would have a lot more time going out, having conversations about risk, changing perceptions of what safety is, and learning how work is done in current circumstances. We must realize that just like our day-to-day operations, work is never done the exact same way every day. There are various situations and various adaptations that must take place throughout our workforce for our own work life, our own life, in order to be quote unquote successful, whatever that definition is. And I think that is where a lot of organizations need to improve upon is to get their workforce involved, because they're already brainstorming the solution, and they also know what the solutions that have been tried before that didn't work.
Yeah. And I take my hat off to you, Brad, because I know this is your approach. I know you take every opportunity you can to get out there and learn from the crews and build that trust and build that collaboration. I feel for many people in their safety roles who I think would like to do that. I think they see exactly what you're talking about, Brad. They see the worth of being out there in the field, engaging in that humble inquiry approach, and yet they end up kind of stuck back in the office. Exactly what Tom's saying here. I can't do that because I got all these numbers to crunch and all these take 5 cards to file away and things.
Let's not go there on take for us.
I know that's a hot button for you, Tom, but for many. But you're right, and I think it takes that visible felt leadership. Being visible is not enough, right? And I've even seen companies where they set quotas that you shall be in the on site X amount of times.
Yeah.
Well, what is the byproduct of that? What does that mean? And we've all heard of the word Gemba, but it's going to where the work is actually happening, having conversations with the employees, trying to figure out what struggles that they may be having, what issues are happening that day. Nothing is linear. Things are changing all the time, and our employees will naturally adapt to create efficiencies and also to complete the job. And that's what we get paid. That's what they get paid to do. And unfortunately, when nothing goes wrong, we think that everybody followed the procedure as written. But that's farthest from the truth.
All right. Can I just ask a double header? There's a couple of things that just worry me at the moment. The first one is I'll just spit them out together rather than back and forth, and then you guys can run with it if you like. First one is psychological safety. My concern is that we're getting a hell of a lot of people putting their fingers in their pie about managing psychological safety in the workplace who have no psychologist or psychological background, education, etc. That worries me to start with, and I don't think it's the realm of most safety advisors to make judgment calls on it. And the second one is mental health first aid. My lovely wife recently did a course, and she's all thrilled about it. But recently speaking to lovely Alyssa Lynch from Ireland, and she quite put it into perspective when she said, they're a signpost. That's all they are. They basically identify people who are struggling and point them in the right direction.
Yeah.
My concern is that mental health first aid is being used as a band-aid over sort of toxic conditions. You know, we're ticking the box to say we've done something. Okay, I'm going to leave it up to you guys where you go with that.
All right. I might hop in first here, Brad. First up, the whole thing, psychological safety. I wish they'd called it something else, because it is increasingly now being confused with psychological health and safety. They are completely different things. There's overlap, but they're very different things. Psychological health and safety is what the current or the recent legislation has been all about here in Australia. Looking for psychosocial risks and managing them. That is not psychological safety. That is psychological health. And so I want to distinguish the two first up. Psychological safety, I tend to simplify and think about it really as trust experienced at the team level. It's a team construct, not an individual construct. And really, that's all it is. Often Amy Edmondson and others have tried to stress that psychological safety is not just another word for trust. It kind of is. I think the differences have been overblown. Psychological safety is essentially trust. All that means is at a team level, we are comfortable to share our thoughts, feelings, emotions, conflict, share ideas, admit mistakes. That is different to psychological health and safety, which is all about psychosocial risks, managing them, identifying them, particularly as there's legislation around them now too. So I just wanted to point that difference out. Creating psychological safety in this definition does not require you to be a psychologist or even have a background in psychology. What it really means is you're a bloody good leader who understands how to create trust amongst your team. That's all that means.
Good.
The second one, the mental health first aid. Look, mixed feelings. I think it's always good if we can encourage people to feel safe to speak up at work about any of those concerns. And if they believe there's a safe place to go at work, maybe because they just know that guy's done the mental health, maybe that could be a good thing. But hopefully we've got people they feel safe to go to anyway. There are some concerns I do have, is that sometimes these people can be seen as de facto counsellors or de facto psychologists. They are not. And there is a danger that we could overstep the mark. I don't necessarily agree with Dom Cooper a great deal, because Dom and I see things like behaviourism a bit differently, but I noticed a comment he made on LinkedIn. Mental health first aid is a profit-making thing. They put people through their training courses. They're not cheap, by the way. I know, because Tanya, my partner, went through one a while ago. It's a good idea. It's got pros and cons. Please, though, don't imagine just because some of your people have been through mental health first aid that you now somehow have a counselling team on your site. You most assuredly do not. You, at best, potentially have some safe places for people to go if they're feeling psychologically vulnerable. That potentially is a good thing.
No, I again, I think Clive nailed it to the head. I agree. I think psychological safety is a cousin, or just another word for trust. It's having mutual respect for one another, being able to speak up without fear of retribution. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what psychological safety actually is. Now, we talk about psychological safety and health. I will leave that up to Clive, which he already talked about, because that's not really my realm of expertise. However, I can tell you that when psychological safety does not exist, it can create a lot of psychological harm.
Sure.
When people do not feel valued, when they're undermined, it can create or facilitate a lot of psychological hazards within the workplace. We giving that responsibility onto someone at health, safety, security, environmental, quality, you name it. And adding some with the expectation that we're going to manage that as well is dangerous because
Yeah.
we don't even have enough time to do the job we have to done today. But again,
Yeah.
like I said, and I agree with Clive here is really it's about building trust. It's about having an environment where people are willing to speak up without fear of retribution. Again, just like when I talk to my employees, they come to me and they'll tell me things because they know one, that I'll do something about it, and number two, that I'll embrace it and that let them, I won't spread the word that, they're the one that told me. So when you go out and go out into uh, the workforce and someone will say, Brad, come here, I want to show you something. They're taking on some personal risk. I need help doing this. I need you to show me how to do this because I didn't quite understand it. Whether it be like a tag out, confined space, or whatever. They're they trust me because they wouldn't ask me if they didn't, because they're taking that interpersonal risk. So that is what it's all about. If you cannot
Yeah.
have psychological safety in the workforce, then forget about anyone ever speaking up or asking for
Yeah.
assistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like the point you made there, Brad, earlier. And that it's a lack of psychological safety is actually a pretty strong predictor of future psychosocial harm,
Mm.
mental health injuries, psychological injuries, because people just won't bring that stuff up. That's a really important point. Thanks for making that.
Well, I've been in some toxic workforces, and I have seen people go through some pretty horrific things from a psychological perspective. And this is very passionate for me, and this is the reason why I study a lot of psychology is because my family has a background of some psychological issues, and there's such a stigma to mental health, and it just drives me up the wall, as if the person wished it upon themselves.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so sad that people can't even speak about it. And I'm glad that people are more and more open to speak about it. Uh, but when people are already suffering from mental a mental health condition that is controlled, uh, and then you put them into a toxic work environment, it just escalates the problem, and it just expediates the problem and makes it worse.
Yeah.
One of the things that I often tell my boss, I tell them that there's a few things that you cannot do to me, right? When I first get hired on, don't ever tell me to come to your office without telling me what you want, because I know that is a pressure point for me. I automatically think the worst. And there's a few others, but I think it's important for us to take interpersonal risk as well.
Yeah.
What are the triggers that are going to make you have anxiety about the future? So I make it a point to always make sure that I take it from that lens and say, I want people to feel at ease. And again, I take that interpersonal risk and saying, this stuff bothers me. And when you tell me to come to your office and you don't tell me why, my mind, the way I think, is always negatively. That's just how my mind is wired. And we we've got to treat people as humans. And we're naturally curious. And we're gonna either think one or two things. Some people can world, but
Yeah.
some people overanalyze things. And I being one. And so those are the things that really uh, really bother me. And so I make sure to make that a point. And I ask my
Yeah.
people that work for me, what are the triggers? What are your triggers? I want you to be as safe as possible, uh, so that I don't do things onto you that I'm not knowledgeable of. So I do have a lot of history and a lot of knowledge within the psychosocial in real life, hazards in real life. So I'm pretty sensitive to this subject when we expect people that have no knowledge of
Yeah.
this and expect them to do something about it.
Yeah.
Because of my background, I read people's minds. I don't read people's minds, but I can tell based on their disposition, based on how they're acting, that something's not quite right.
Yeah.
And it's simply because I've been there, because I've had the knowledge and I've been through it personally. But not everybody has that understanding. They don't have that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or even necessarily the want to actually assist. Not
That's
everybody
true.
has that either. So
That's
yeah,
true.
good on you, mate.
Yep.
All right. Got a question here that's probably pokes the bear a bit, and it's probably more aimed your way,
Great.
Brad, than Clive's. But Clive, you can have your input as well. Please do. All right. I saw it on LinkedIn. Lovely LinkedIn. The source of all truths in my world, anyhow. I saw this morning from a highly respected gentleman. He posted an article, a link to an article, which says 30% of all mass shootings in the US occur at either the workplace or are workplace related. I might have put a comment up saying, so what you're saying is that 70% have got nothing to do with the workplace or things that happen at work. We don't actually have many mass shootings, workplace related or not here. Brad, why do you think so many? What do you think a significant number of workplace mass shootings happen in the workplace in the US?
I would be negligent if I tried to attribute a cause. However, I have personally been in a workplace where this happened, where there was a double homicide and a suicide. And so I cannot, with the respect from all those that have lost their lives, have the ability to comment and try to understand the struggles, because I've lived through it. I was in a 6-hour standoff, and when I worked at an organization, the why is those toxic work environments, that we dehumanize people, that we treat people less than human. That is one factor that will create a work environment where people feel that they feel more empowered and feel more safe. But for me to talk about this, and it would not be would not benefit me.
Yep, fair enough. Fair enough.
Respectfully so.
Yeah.
It's just a topic that it's sort of like BBS. It's too creates too much unknowns, and I don't want to. I'm not an expert in this area, and this is such a hot topic right now, and I know it is. And I think Clive, from a psychological standpoint, is probably more in depth to understanding this from a holistic standpoint than I could ever be.
Sure. Maybe I'm not sure. It's a big one, mate. Geez, Tom, you've really thrown at us today. And there are so many variables here. unfortunately, some of them cannot be unhitched from politics.
Mm.
And that's a bit of a sad fact. So maybe I can talk more about the Australian perspective on this. Yeah, you're right. We don't have that. And there's a few reasons for that. That's not to say that we don't have people in toxic workplaces who get pushed over the edge, right?
Mm.
And Brad alleged that's the psychosocial harm so great, the culture's so toxic. People are prepared to come back in and they want some sort of payback. They want some sort, they're so hurt or whatever that is. Now, here in Australia, I've actually had workplaces where somebody's walked in and yelled and screamed right across the office, and yelled, screams and named people and all that sort of stuff. That happens. That's another indicator too. The difference here is they don't have guns.
Mm. That's I think that's actually correct. If they're not as available, there's no option for that sort of thing. But yeah, each country to their own. I mean, seriously, it's not for us to preach to anyone.
No, and what I would like to say is for all those families that have suffered, and not only that, my wife worked at a school that had a mass shooting, that where many lives were lost and teachers' lives were lost, and the struggles that and the unanswered questions that they'll never have.
Mm.
And that is why this is how I view safety. That's why I try to humanize safety so much, because it is people. These are people's lives, regardless of why, how, or who. They will never walk this earth again. And so my deepest condolences to anyone that has ever lost their life due to these type of acts or any type of work-related event. That is something that we never want to deal with. And
that is all absolutely true, mate.
For me, what I drive. Yeah. And that is what drives me each and every day.
Yep. All right, gentlemen. I'm going to leave it up to you guys. Do you have anything else that you'd like to have a chat today? Because I'm running out of air, oxygen. I'm just
yeah. I mean, let me just say first up, mate. We had no agenda, all right, for this conversation, at least that I'm aware of.
No.
And we've been going now. What have we been doing? Best part of an hour and a half.
Jeez,
that's pretty good going, mate. It's like you invited a couple of talkers on, and yeah, well done. Well done, Brad. That was you wanted free flowing. I think that's that happened.
No, yeah, I do appreciate you guys, and I struggle to find the appropriate adjectives or words to describe my views of Clive. He has become a great friend of mine and a mentor of mine, and he has made himself available to me with questions that has helped me grow into a more enlightful, better leader. He continues to speak out against common myths and strategies, and that's to continue to circulate that cause more harm than good. But I would like to take this time to publicly thank Clive, and he and I have spent a lot of time behind the scenes talking about these subjects around psychological safety, building trust, caring, humanizing the workforce, and that's just him being a humble human being, and you can't ask for much of a better person than that. So, and not to take away from you, Tom, because you had us on here, and that's one of the reasons why I think you probably felt that was a good threesome, if you will, because that I endure Clive so much, and the way he interacts with people with so much respect.
Yeah,
you are very, very kind. Thank you, Brad. By the way, before I let it escape, so you really want to promote this I think just use the word that Brad used. Safety threesome. That's going to get some views. Brad,
yeah.
Brad, I thank you. But can I just say, mate, it's a joy for me to see leaders like you coming through. I just write about this stuff and teach this stuff. You are actually out there doing it. All right. You're actually influencing the employees. To me, again, in short, what you're doing is humanizing safety. And I reckon that's an essential part of it. So no, I take my hat off to you, sir. I always enjoy following your journey and speaking with you and seeing what you're doing out there, because you are actually doing it. And again, Tom, thank you, mate. The GOAT, who apparently has threesomes on Zoom. So there you go.
Oh, by the way, Clive, we should ask why you're here. When's the next book come out?
I've been asked that so many times. There's a couple of things. The publishers, I think, would like me to do a second edition of the first book, which I could easily do. A lot has happened since then. But I'm thinking maybe another book, a new book. But it's still a way off yet, mate. My calendar is it's just a time thing, right?
Yeah.
That could be me procrastinating. But at the moment, we are just flat chat. Yeah.
All right. No worries. Once again, thanks.
Maybe we could call it.
Yeah.
Maybe we could call it safety threesomes.
Let's not.
Let's not.
I think my publisher would probably go for that.
Yeah.
My wife wouldn't. But anyhow, we might leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time today. I really do enjoy both of your company and your thoughts. So thanks again, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
All right.
Thanks, Tom.
Great,
Thank you, Brad. Get a good
Thank
sleep,
you.
mate.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.